Hello, I'm Jerry Winsett, along with Kenneth Ezell, and in this course we're going to be talking about thermal expansion and how thermal expansion affects water heaters. Now, we hear about thermal expansion a lot, so give a little bit of background about thermal expansion and kind of really what is it?
Well, when we heat water, it physically gets bigger, right? And usually the number one effect you'll see of that water getting bigger is a dripping T&P valve. Because with water, as it gets bigger, if you're in a closed plumbing system and that water has nowhere to go, it's just going to increase pressure inside the tank, right? Until the pressure increases up to 150 psi, it's where the water heater's pressure relief valve discharges. Years ago, we didn't have this problem. Everyone was on an open plumbing system, meaning there was no backflow preventer between your house and the city supply.
Okay.
Right, but different government regulations have come through in recent years, and they require you to have a backflow preventer. Because when the water company sells you water, they don't want it back.
Right.
You know, they don't want contamination that could be in your plumbing system getting back to the main supply, affecting people downstream. And so, usually without you even knowing most of the time, is that they have gone through, changed the water meters out, and added water meters with a backflow preventer. And now that's cut us off from the main city supply, so the expanded water has nowhere to go.
And this not only affects the water heater, but it affects everything on that plumbing line.
Correct, because your water heater is installed in your plumbing line, so
Right.
when the pressure goes up in that, it increases the pressure over your home's plumbing system. And that's typically one of the number one causes for failed toilet valves, ice makers, the solenoids in it, washing machines, the solenoids in that, and even the water solenoids in your dishwasher. It just puts a lot more pressure on all that stuff than is what's really needed.
Okay, so that's a little bit about the background of thermal expansion. To understand it more, watch this.
Water pressure is constantly changing. During the day, when more people are using water, the pressure is lower. At night, as people use less water, the pressure rises. Every day, 365 days a year, the water pressure cycles between higher pressures at night and lower pressures during the day. These pressure changes cause the tank to stretch and contract. The constant flexing of the tank can cause the glass lining to develop microscopic cracks and expose the steel underneath to the corrosive effects of water. Another source of damage from water pressure comes from the fact that cold water expands when heated. This is called thermal expansion. In the past, thermal expansion pushed water at a higher pressure back into the public water supply. Today, in most areas, environmental regulations prohibit this practice, and water utilities have been required to install backflow preventers and check valves. This creates what is known as a closed plumbing system. Now, when the water heater goes through a heating cycle, the water in the tank expands, but can't push back into the public water supply. Since water isn't compressible, the water pressure in a home or business can rise dramatically, much higher than the pressure supplied by the water company, in many cases 120 psi or more. This is why some people report the toilet running at night when no one has used it. The water heater has run through a heating cycle, and the expanded water can't escape the house. The water pressure goes up until it finds a weak spot, sometimes a toilet valve, and forces it open. In many cases, it can cause the relief valve on the water heater to open briefly to relieve the excess pressure. But these high-pressure thermal expansion cycles do something else. They cause the tank to balloon out, much more severely than the stretching caused by daily water pressure changes. Thermal expansion can easily raise the home or business water pressure to levels higher than the plumbing system or attached appliances can handle. Plumbing codes today in every part of the U.S. require homes and businesses with a closed plumbing system to have a thermal expansion tank. Thermal expansion tanks have a rubber bladder inside, which gives the expanded water a place to go without increasing the home's water pressure. Properly sized and installed, a thermal expansion tank can prevent the large increases in water pressure caused by heating cold water.
So let's say we have a thermal expansion tank installed, but I'm still getting a dripping T&P valve. Is there a way I can check to make sure it's installed properly?
The easiest way to see if it's installed properly or if it's functioning is to literally get the water pressure gauge, usually one with a lazy hand. And you can install it anywhere on the home's plumbing system,
Okay.
but typically where I would install it would be right on the water heater's drain valve.
Okay.
So we'd install it on the water heater's drain valve, open the drain valve, and then get the water heater to go into a heat cycle.
Okay.
And if you should see your static water pressure, which your water pressure is normally, during that heat cycle, if your expansion tank is bad or not working or sized improperly, you would see that hand start climbing, right? And typically what we're going to see is the hand climb to 150 psi, where it's going to maintain that pressure because the relief valve is going to start dripping on the water heater.
Now, one thing you have to remember when we're doing that test is to make sure that all your faucets are off, because if they're not, then, obviously you're not going to see the accurate pressure.
Yeah, you're not going to see the pressure climb. Once you open a faucet or toilet flushes or something, you're going to see, the hand go back down. And this is something you'll see pretty quickly, so just make sure no one in the home's, using any water for, a few minutes while you do this test.
Okay, well, let's say we don't have a thermal expansion tank. What size? I know they make a couple of different sizes. Which size should I pick?
Yeah, usually in a residential application, you usually see either a 2 or a 5-gallon expansion tank. The old rule of thumb was if you had a water heater, usually 55 gallons and less, you'd use a 2-gallon. And 55 gallons or more, you could use a 5-gallon.
Okay.
But there's several other factors that go into that. Depending on whatever your water pressure is, typically should be between 50 and 60 psi, no more than 80. Your temperature differential, like what you're heating water to, your temperature difference, the bigger that number is from your starting temp to your finished temp, you're going to get more expansion, because the more you heat water, the bigger it gets.
Okay.
And so typically when in doubt, I would go with the 5-gallon expansion tank. But the biggest rules that you want to follow would be making sure that's properly sized, make sure it's big enough, and that it's properly charged. You always want to pre-charge that expansion tank to the home's water pressure before you install it.
Yeah, that's my next question. Installing these, there is a rule of thumb that we have to pre-charge them before we install it. Is there anything else we need to think about while we're installing these heaters?
Correct.
These tanks?
So check your water pressure, whatever your water pressure is. We need to pre-charge it. So you want to make sure your water pressure is between 50 and 60 psi.
Okay.
Right? If it's not between 50 and 60 psi, you're probably going to need a pressure reducing valve installed on the system.
Okay.
Right? So once you get your water pressure under control, check the water pressure, get the exact number, pre-charge that expansion tank to that number, right? So if I have 55 psi of water pressure, you need 55 psi of air in that tank while it's empty, meaning not hooked onto the plumbing system. Then you typically just install it in the cold water line between the backflow preventer and the water heater.
So no check valves in between either.
Correct. Usually no shut-off valves either.
Remember, incoming water pressure needs to be between 50 and 60 psi. And before you install the thermal expansion tank, pre-charge it with air to whatever the incoming water pressure is. By installing a thermal expansion tank, you're not only going to extend the life of the water heater, but everything on the plumbing line.